What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks into what should be a routine morning show interview, only to find himself facing a host with a hidden agenda and a personal vendetta? What you're about to witness is the most shocking live television moment of the year, where professionalism went out the window and things got brutally personal. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is a masterclass in how power can corrupt even the most seasoned television personalities. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds here. Michael B. Jordan walked into the Good Morning America studio that morning, expecting the usual promotional circuit routine. Fresh off his latest blockbuster success, he was there to discuss his upcoming projects and connect with fans. The cameras weren't rolling yet, but the tension in the air was already thick enough to cut with a knife. George Stephanopoulos sat behind the anchor desk, shuffling through his notes with an intensity that seemed unusual for what should have been a straightforward entertainment segment. His producer had briefed him on the talking points, standard stuff about Jordan's career trajectory and upcoming films. But George had his own agenda brewing beneath the surface. "Michael, great to have you here," George said as Jordan settled into the guest chair, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Thanks for having me, George. Always a pleasure to be on the show," Jordan replied, adjusting his jacket and preparing for what he assumed would be another friendly chat about his work. The countdown began. 3, 2, 1, and they were live. "Good morning. I'm George Stephanopoulos, and we're here with actor Michael B. Jordan," George began, his television persona switching on like a light. "Michael, you've had quite the year, but I want to start with something a bit more personal." Jordan's eyebrows raised slightly. This wasn't the opening he'd expected, but he maintained his composure. "Sure. What would you like to know? There have been some interesting reports about your behavior on set lately. Sources close to several productions have described you as, and I quote, difficult to work with and demanding. How do you respond to those allegations?" The studio fell silent. Jordan's media training kicked in, but there was a flash of genuine surprise in his eyes. "I'm sorry, George, but I'm not sure what you're referring to. I pride myself on professionalism, and I've never had any serious issues with cast or crew on any of my projects." George leaned forward, his voice taking on a more aggressive tone. "Really? Because I have it on good authority that during your last film, you made unreasonable demands that cost the production significant money and time. Cast members have complained privately about your attitude." "George, I think there might be some misinformation here," Jordan said, his voice steady but with an edge creeping in. "I work hard. I show up prepared. And I treat everyone with respect. If there are specific incidents you're referring to, I'd be happy to address them, but these vague accusations aren't really fair." "Vague?" George's voice sharpened. "Let me be more specific then. Multiple sources tell me you refused to work with certain crew members because you felt they weren't up to your standards. You allegedly walked off set multiple times, causing delays that affected everyone's schedule." Jordan's jaw tightened. "That's absolutely untrue, George. I don't know where you're getting this information, but it's false. I've never walked off a set in my career. I'm wondering why you're choosing to focus on unsubstantiated rumors instead of discussing the actual work." "Because the work is secondary when behavior becomes an issue," George shot back. "The public has a right to know what kind of person they're supporting at the box office." "What kind of person I am?" Jordan's voice rose slightly. "George, you're making character assassinations based on anonymous sources and treating them as fact on live television. This isn't journalism. This is a hit piece." George's smile was cold. "I'm simply asking the tough questions that others won't ask. Isn't that what good journalism is about? Good journalism involves fact-checking and giving people a fair opportunity to respond," Jordan replied, his composure beginning to crack. "What you're doing right now is ambush journalism at its worst." The tension in the studio was electric. Crew members exchanged worried glances as they watched their seasoned host and respected guest locked in an increasingly heated exchange. "Michael, your defensiveness is quite telling," George continued, clearly enjoying having rattled his guest. "If these allegations are false, why are you getting so upset?" "I'm not getting upset, George. I'm getting disgusted," Jordan said, his voice gaining strength. "I came here in good faith to talk about my work and connect with fans. Instead, you're trying to destroy my reputation with gossip and lies. George shuffled through his papers dramatically. I have more sources here that paint a troubling picture of your recent behavior. Sources that describe temper tantrums and diva-like demands. Stop, Jordan said firmly. I want to see these sources. I want names, dates, specific incidents. Because what you're doing right now is character assassination, and I won't sit here and let you destroy my reputation based on lies. Sources need to be protected, George replied smugly. But I can tell you that multiple people from your last 3 projects have come forward with similar stories. Jordan stood up slightly in his chair. This is unbelievable. You're hiding behind anonymous sources to make serious accusations about my character and professionalism. Where's your proof? Where's your evidence? The proof is in the pattern of behavior described by people who've worked with you, George said, his tone becoming more condescending. Multiple independent sources telling the same story. Or multiple people being fed the same false narrative, Jordan countered. George, I've been in this industry for years. I've worked with hundreds of people. If I was the person you're describing, don't you think there would be public complaints? Don't you think directors wouldn't want to work with me? George's eyes gleamed with malice. Maybe they're just too polite to say it publicly. Maybe they're afraid of the backlash from your fans. Or maybe, Jordan said, his voice carrying a dangerous calm, you're pushing a false narrative for reasons I can't even begin to understand. The studio atmosphere had shifted from professional to toxic in a matter of minutes. George's producer was frantically gesturing from behind the cameras, but George seemed oblivious to everything except his mission to tear down his guest. Let's talk about your personal life then, George said, pivoting with the ruthlessness of a shark sensing blood in the water. There are rumors about your relationships with co-stars that some might find concerning. Jordan's face went stone cold. Excuse me? Well, you've had romantic storylines with several leading ladies, and sources suggest that you sometimes have trouble separating fiction from reality on set, George continued, clearly relishing the discomfort he was causing. George, stop right there, Jordan said, his voice carrying a warning that would have made any reasonable person reconsider. You're crossing lines that have nothing to do with my professional work or why I'm here today. But it does relate to your professionalism, doesn't it? George pressed on. If you can't maintain appropriate boundaries with colleagues, that speaks to character. Jordan leaned forward, his eyes locked on George's. You want to talk about character? Let's talk about the character it takes to ambush someone on live television with fabricated stories and personal attacks. What's this really about, George? This is about accountability, George replied, but his voice wavered slightly for the first time. This is about asking the hard questions. No, this is about something else entirely, Jordan said, his voice steady and controlled despite the fire in his eyes. This is personal for you, isn't it? What did I do to you, George? When did I offend you? Because this level of hostility doesn't come from nowhere. George's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly underneath. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm asking directly, Jordan said. Did I turn down an interview with you before? Did I not show up to something? Did someone connected to me slight you in some way? Because this isn't journalism. This is revenge. You're being paranoid, George said, but his confidence was shaking. I'm simply doing my job. Your job is to inform the public, not to destroy people based on gossip and lies, Jordan shot back. And you're doing it badly, really badly. The crew was now openly staring, some holding their breath as they watched one of television's most respected anchors being systematically dismantled by his guest. Michael, I think you're overreacting. George tried to regain control, but his voice lacked its earlier venom. Am I? Let's recap what you've done in the last 10 minutes, Jordan said, his media training completely abandoned now in favor of raw honesty. You've accused me of being difficult to work with, of making unreasonable demands, of walking off sets, of being unprofessional with co-stars, all based on anonymous sources that you refuse to name or verify. You've turned what should have been a promotional interview into a character assassination attempt. And you think I'm overreacting? I'm asking legitimate questions based on credible sources, George insisted, but he was clearly rattled. Credible sources? Jordan laughed, but there was no humor in it. George, let me explain something to you about credible sources. Credible sources have names. They have specific incidents they can point to. They have evidence. What you have is gossip, and you're treating it like gospel truth on national television. George tried to shuffle back to his prepared questions, but Jordan wasn't finished. You know what's really interesting about this, George? I've been doing interviews for over a decade. I've sat across from some of the toughest journalists in the business. I've answered hard questions about my career, my choices, even my personal life when it was relevant. But I've never experienced anything like this. This isn't journalism. This is a hit job. I resent that accusation, George said, his professional facade cracking further. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you came into this interview with a predetermined narrative and you're trying to force me into it regardless of the truth. Jordan replied. That's not journalism, that's propaganda. George's face was flushing red now. You're way out of line. I'm out of line? Jordan's voice rose for the first time. You've spent the last 15 minutes trying to destroy my reputation on live television based on lies. And I'm out of line for defending myself? I'm trying to get honest answers, George said weakly. No, you're trying to create a scandal where none exists, Jordan countered. And the really sad part is, you're doing it badly. Any journalism student could tell you that what you're doing right now violates every principle of ethical reporting. The silence that followed was deafening. George looked around the studio as if seeing it for the first time, suddenly aware that dozens of people were watching him fail spectacularly. Let me ask you something, George, Jordan continued, his voice dropping to a conversational tone that was somehow more threatening than when he was raising his voice. How many of your sources actually exist? Because I'm starting to think this whole thing is based on rumors you heard at some Hollywood party and decided to treat as fact. I don't have to reveal my sources, George said, but he sounded defeated. You don't have to reveal them, but you should be able to verify them, Jordan replied. And I don't think you can. I think you heard some gossip, maybe someone who was upset about not getting a role or not getting the access they wanted, and you decided to run with it without doing any actual investigation. George opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For the first time in his career, he was completely speechless on live television. Here's what I think happened, Jordan continued, pressing his advantage. Someone fed you a story about me, someone with their own agenda, and instead of doing your job and investigating it, you decided to use your platform to attack me. That's not journalism, George. That's being used. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of George's complete humiliation. His producer was making cutting motions, but George seemed frozen, unable to regain control of his own show. You want to know what's really unprofessional? Jordan asked, his voice steady and calm now. Using your position of power to attack someone who came here in good faith. That's unprofessional. That's unethical. And frankly, it's beneath the standards that Good Morning America should represent. The studio had become a battlefield, and George was losing badly. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped his notes, realizing that every word out of his mouth was only making things worse for him. Michael, I think we should move on to discussing your upcoming projects, George said desperately, trying to salvage what was left of the interview. Oh, now you want to talk about my work? Jordan's voice dripped with disdain. After spending 20 minutes trying to destroy my reputation with lies and innuendo, now you want to pivot to the promotional stuff? That's not how this works, George. I was simply trying to address some concerns that have been raised, George said weakly. Concerns raised by whom? Jordan demanded. Give me one name. One specific incident. One piece of actual evidence to support anything you've said today. George's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The seconds ticked by in agonizing silence as viewers across America watched one of television's most prominent anchors completely fall apart. I thought so, Jordan said, shaking his head in disgust. You have nothing. This entire ambush was based on nothing but gossip and malice. I don't appreciate your tone, George said, making one last desperate attempt to regain some authority. And I don't appreciate being ambushed on live television by someone who's supposed to be a professional journalist, Jordan shot back. Your tone? George, you've been hostile and unprofessional from the moment the cameras started rolling. You've made false accusations, refused to provide evidence, and turned what should have been a simple interview into a character assassination attempt. And you're concerned about my tone? The producer was now frantically signaling for a commercial break, but George seemed oblivious to everything except his complete humiliation playing out in front of millions of viewers. Look, Michael, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. George tried, his voice now pleading rather than aggressive. Wrong foot? Jordan's laugh was sharp and cutting. George, you didn't get off on the wrong foot. You deliberately chose to attack me based on lies. That's not a misstep. That's a choice. A really bad choice. I was just trying to ask tough questions, George said, but even he didn't sound convinced anymore. Tough questions are about my career decisions, my artistic choices, my future projects. Jordan replied. Tough questions aren't fabricated attacks on my character, based on anonymous sources that probably don't even exist. George looked around the studio helplessly, finally seeing the faces of his crew staring at him with a mixture of shock and disappointment. These were people who had worked with him for years, and they were watching him destroy his own credibility in real time. I think there's been a misunderstanding, George said quietly. No misunderstanding, Jordan said firmly. You came in here with an agenda to attack me. And when I defended myself, you doubled down, instead of backing off. The only misunderstanding is how you thought this was going to play out. Maybe we should take a break, George suggested weakly. Why? So you can regroup and come back with more lies? Jordan asked. No, George. We're going to finish this right here. Right now. You started this. So let's end it. The tension was so thick that even the cameramen were holding their breath. This was live television at its most raw and unfiltered. I want you to do something for me, George, Jordan said, his voice taking on an almost conversational tone that was somehow more intimidating than his earlier anger. I want you to look directly into that camera and tell the audience exactly what evidence you have to support the accusations you've made today. I can't reveal my sources, George said automatically. I'm not asking you to reveal sources, Jordan replied patiently. I'm asking you to provide evidence. Dates, locations, specific incidents. Anything concrete that supports what you've been saying. George stared at the camera, his mouth moving silently as he realized he had absolutely nothing. That's what I thought, Jordan said, standing up from his chair. Ladies and gentlemen watching at home, what you've just witnessed is what happens when journalism dies and gossip takes its place. You can't just leave, George said desperately, but his voice cracked. Actually, I can, Jordan replied, removing his microphone. I came here to promote my work and connect with fans. Instead, I was ambushed by someone who decided to use his platform to spread lies. I won't be a part of this any longer. Michael, please, George said, and for the first time, there was genuine panic in his voice. Jordan paused and turned back to face George one last time. You know what the saddest part about all this is, George? You had the opportunity to have a great conversation with me. I would have talked about my journey, my challenges, my hopes for future projects. I would have been open and honest about the real struggles of working in this industry. Instead, you chose to attack me with lies. That's on you, not me. George's face had gone pale. The weight of what he had done was finally hitting him as he realized that millions of viewers had just watched him make a fool of himself on national television. This is still my show, George said weakly, making one final attempt at authority. Is it? Jordan asked, looking around the studio at the crew members who were openly shaking their heads in disapproval. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you just lost control of everything. With that, Jordan walked off the set, leaving George sitting alone at the anchor desk, staring into the cameras with the expression of a man who had just watched his career implode in real time. The silence that followed was deafening. For several long seconds, George just sat there, apparently unable to process what had just happened. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. We'll be right back after this commercial break. But everyone in that studio knew that nothing would ever be right again. George had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and the entire world had watched him do it. The interview that was supposed to be a routine promotional segment had instead become a masterclass in how power without accountability can destroy everything it touches. The cameras finally cut away, but the damage was already done. In less than 30 minutes, George Stephanopoulos had managed to destroy his own reputation, while inadvertently proving exactly why Michael B. Jordan is one of the most respected figures in Hollywood. What did you think of this explosive confrontation? Have you ever seen a television interview go this wrong? Drop a comment below with your thoughts, and make sure to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one. How do you think George should have handled this situation differently?